talking about the Korean diaspora, which is a fancy way of saying how Koreans ended up everywhere. So let's start with maps. Everyone here likes maps. This is something we've learned. You're very familiar with this, I assume. But maybe this part up here is a little more strange, I guess. So here we have the city of Vladivostok, and this area right there is called the maritime area of Russia. That's how it translates. I guess I have a mouse here. Circle it. And this is a really key, important area that we're going to talk about today. So we'll start with some history. How did the Koreans end up in Russia? Because there are a lot, and I'll tell you, there are a lot. I've been there. Take it from me. So it started in the 1860s. There was a kind of this political turmoil, it seems, is what I've been reading, and a lot of Koreans were just trying to move out to greener pastures. You know, the grass is always greener on the other side. And so they started moving north. So if we're going, so they came up here, moved over here and to China, and kept moving over here to Russia and settled in this area, specifically Vladivostok. And this area was kind of interesting. It's when they first moved, Russians had no problem with loads of Koreans coming in. A couple of thousand here and there. It wasn't really that big of a deal. In fact, Russians gave them land, and there were little Korean towns, you know, kind of speckled all around that area. And there wasn't a lot of animosity, kind of like when the Mormons moved. At first, no one really had a huge problem with it, but the longer we were there, the more political power we got, the more outspoken we were with our views, the more people started to dislike us. It's kind of the same with Koreans. The more Koreans that started showing up, the more Russians were like, yeah, you know, you guys are kind of, take it easy, you know? Or like America right now with our immigration concerns. It's sort of the same thing. The Russians started to kind of get a little less comfortable with the idea of Koreans coming in. I have here Khabarovsk. 1905, Khabarovsk had 500 Koreans, so not a lot, right? Like 500. Khabarovsk is farther north than what I showed you. I'll show you a map here. Khabarovsk is this star. So like they came up here. And this is kind of the path of the spread. It just kept moving north. Some came up here to Vladivostok, and that's where the majority ended up, is, like I said, in that maritime area. A couple more moved up farther north to Khabarovsk and over here to this fish-looking island, Sakhalin. And I will talk about those in a second. Okay, the Russian Empire. So, like I said earlier, Koreans had their own kind of little communities, little social groups, and the Tsar at first wasn't really super opposed to them, just like any other Russian, but then he started getting some negative comments from his people, and that caused them to worry a little bit. It's created this xenophobia, this fear of outsiders. And here we can see the population in 20 years jumped, what was that, 800%? Like, massive, massive immigration. And it started to scare Russians a lot. So the Tsar decided what he was going to do is make his first relocation plans here in the 1880s. He put forth a plan to disperse the Koreans so they weren't all clustered up together in that area. Because it's actually a small state. That's a state in Russia, and it's, like, when you consider the size of like Yakutia, like on a map, it's that big. You know, it's very small. A lot of them, he wanted to kind of spread them out, wanted to destroy these communities, I guess not destroy, he wanted to Russianize these communities of Koreans instead of having them be just Koreans. And that's going to come important here when we have the beginning of the Soviet Union. So we have the Japan beats Russia in the Russo-Japanese War. I don't know if you knew that there was a Russo-Japanese War, but there was. And Japanese won. It was kind of a big deal for Japanese. This was a big motivator for them. And because of this victory, they ended up splitting up that island that I showed you, that fish. See this? Used to all be Russia, but after the Russo-Japanese War, they split it right here. And they got the south end. There were already some Koreans living there, but not a whole lot. The Japanese built up the main city there, Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk. Very nice city, I might add, because the Japanese made it and not the Russians. So then we get to 1910. Japan fully takes over Korea. And this is really, really important for this story. Because, well, I'll get to that in a second. Okay, October 1917. This is the Russian Revolution. This is Lenin, you know, this is everything. So there were about 100,000 Koreans. So remember I showed you there was like 88,000, or I'm sorry, 66,000 in 1902. So another 15 years, we jumped up another 40,000 people. So, you know, immigration's still, it hasn't stemmed yet. I haven't stopped the flow. About 82% of them were in that area I showed you with Vladivostok, the first map. That little tiny area there, that 82%, so 82,000 just about. And they made up a third of the population of that area. So this was kind of concerning to the Russians, and so I guess I'll talk about the Russians' perspective of it in just a second. Back to Sakhalin. The Japanese had taken it, and they decided that they needed to amp up their wartime manufacturing. And so, beginning of 1935, we start getting deportations from Korea to Sakhalin, because Korea was Japanese. So they would take the Koreans, they'd move them over here. Sakhalin has a lot of resources. There's a lot of oil and a lot of coal. And both of those things were very important for if you're going to make military, you know, you need fuel. And so they were sending Koreans there, because why send a Japanese person to work in these horrible, horrible, you know, mines when you can have a Korean? They're not Japanese, you know, they're second-class citizens. Okay, and then, yeah, so lots of Koreans ended up on Sakhalin because of this. It's hard to say, like, the statistics, because there's kind of some not super good information on it. So let's just talk about Sakhalin for another minute. After World War II ends, Russia takes full control of the island. Thing is, though, that they got all these Koreans here that they don't know what to do with. And so a man I know, his name is, help me with this, Don Tae? Okay, close enough. That's how it's pronounced in Russian, Don Tae. So he went to a Japanese school. He moved there in 1945. He was a little baby. He was about 5 years old. Well, I guess 5 years old wasn't a baby. But his father moved there in 1935. He got shipped out with his mother in 1940. So his father worked in the mines for 5 years without his family. And then they were able to come. It took like 4 boats. Very long, very interesting story. I can tell you about it later. He went to a Japanese school at first, and then 45 came along, and the Russians won. And the Russians decided, you know what, we have all these Koreans, let's make a Korean school. That lasted about 2 years. And then they switched to Russian, because they're like, we're Russia. We're going to do this the Russian way. This is something really interesting that he said. He said, life was like living under the yoke of the Mongols. That's how Russians describe the Mongol invasion. The Mongols took over Russia, and it was terrible for Russians, and they hated it, and it's just a very captivating image that he uses here. Interesting. He had no citizenship, neither did his family. So because of that, just like in North Korea, you were saying that you have to file to move. It was kind of the same thing in Russia. You have to set a register for where you're going to live. And so it's like, if you're not a citizen, you can't actually move. They don't like you moving. They say where you're at is where you're going to stay. Soviet Now it's a little bit better. They let you move, but you still have to register with your city. And there was all sorts of things that came with not having citizenship that I'm not going to really touch on. Just know that it was a very hard life and not very pleasant. So here's a statistic. In 1923, 1,300 of 6,000 people, so 6,000 applicants, of them only 1,300 got citizenship, and in 24, the next year, only 1,200 of 4,000. Some were able to leave, and they went to North Korea, some went to South Korea, and some went to other parts of Russia, namely the Far East, where I showed you at the beginning. On the island, there popped up these little pocket ghettos, little communities where it's just Koreans, and they're still kind of alive today. Generally, the Korean population will only marry with either Japanese or Korean or mixed descent individuals, and they don't really spread out much. Okay, Stalin, he was afraid of them because they're Japanese, don't you know? Because Korea was under Japanese control, so that means they're all the same. They're the same ethnicity, they're the same everything. And he saw that they were really close to Japan, and that's scary, so what are you going to do? You're going to move them. Get them out of the way. And he looked at the Tsar, and he's like, look, we already have a precedent. Someone tried to move these people a long time ago, and well, that didn't work. I'm going to do it, and it's going to work, by golly. And he saw that there were all these famines going on in Central Asia, and he said, you know what, you Koreans, you guys are darn good at making rice. Why don't you move out there? And that's an order. So rapid relocation, we're talking hundreds of thousands in a matter of months. In 4 months, we're talking 180,000 people moved. A couple tens of thousands died, but such is the way of life when you're moving people without their will and consent. So they were terrible treatment. They were told that they were going to get paid. They weren't paid for anything. They didn't receive any compensation. They weren't fed. This train ride is like 2 weeks. They were on the train for 2 weeks. It was awful. Russian trains are terrible. And they're all like, you're all smushed together. Rice fields, talked about that, Central Asia. All right. These are the area, this right here. So this is the area I'm talking about, Central Asia. This was all part of the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. These were the 4 that they mostly got sent to. Highest concentration is right here at the star. It's Alma-Ata, which was, yeah. This is fertile land, but it's kind of hard. They had a really hard life. It was difficult for them to get assimilated. It was difficult for them to start. Tens of thousands of Koreans died the first couple years because the relocation turns out happened during the famine. You know, that's why he moved them, and so there wasn't enough food to feed everyone. Hello? You
better hurry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. There's so much information. Okay, modern Russia, there wasn't, so now that Russia's not Soviet, the people who are in Kazakhstan and on Sakhalin, they're not really moving to Korea. Some are, but there's no mass migration like everyone was expecting. Everyone was expecting that everyone would leave.
Because they have family and
they have family, horrible treatment, they're second-class citizens. Yes, everything was bad for Koreans in Russia.
But they're not moving because they have family and they're going to stay.
So this right here is the important part. So like, they've adopted Russian culture. They use patronymics. So that means like, Ivan Ivanovich, Ivan, the son of Ivan. That's your middle name.
Kimovich?
No, her name is, so it wouldn't be Kim, it would be like whatever his first name is. So example.
Dongjian.
Well, I couldn't do him, I don't know what his, so like his son is Valery. His son would be Valery Donteyevich.
Donteyevich.
Yeah. So it's kind of weird. But now they start giving Russian names. So Dante's granddaughter, Tanya, her name is Tanya Valerovna. So, because he had his Russian name, her dad. That's kind of what they did. They speak Russian, they took the Russian way of doing things, they live in a Russian culture, they just have adopted a lot of Russian things, but they still hold on to a lot of Korean identity things. So like, you know, the table thing, when you're like a baby, and you like whatever the first things are you grab, that's like the thing that determines your life. Yeah, they still do that, and they still eat Korean food, they still do Korean cultural events, but they've kind of adopted both cultures. Sakhalin currently has about 12% of the population being Korean. Kazakhstan, as of 1999, I don't have any more current statistics, but that's 0.7%, so not a lot.